Poland is currently on the way to becoming really the strongest NATO shield and a very responsible leader of the NATO's eastern flank.
Now, US President Trump has accused the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and the French President Emmanuel Macron of doing nothing to end the war in Ukraine ahead of their visits to the White House next week. Clearly, that is factually inaccurate. Both countries have donated and supported military efforts in the country. Trump also says Ukraine's President Zelensky has no cards in peace negotiations, adding, I don't think he's very important to be in meetings. Alex Kadier joins us from Kyiv this morning. Alex, good morning.
Good morning.
So these comments on Starmer and Macron by President Trump, I mean, it has become almost typical of Trump to turn on allies with certainly rude words and rude comments. I mean, it is factually inaccurate. I'm just trying to understand what he may have been trying to get at.
Well, I mean, his understanding, and this is the narrative that you've heard from the beginning of the Trump administration. We heard that from Pete Hegseth when he was at the meeting of NATO defense ministers just a couple of weeks ago, that Donald Trump is the only man who can bring peace to this country. That is his vision. That is how he sees it. And that's how all his cabinet see it as well. And so you would imagine that acknowledging that Prime Minister Starmer or President Macron would have in any way a role in bringing peace to Ukraine seems unthinkable, because only he, Donald Trump, can bring that peace. Now, again, one of the things that you'll have heard from his narrative, talking about Ukraine being to blame for this war, or starting this war. Obviously, he's reversed course on that, and we'll come back to that. But there's also a perception in some parts that actually military support for Ukraine would not have brought peace. And therefore, actually, these negotiations, this quote-unquote tough negotiating by Donald Trump, is the only thing that can bring peace. And therefore, European support can be belittled in the way that he did it.
Elsewhere this morning, because there's obviously lots going on, lots of comment from Trump to consider, but we also have the strategising around Sir Keir Starmer's visit to the White House next week. And we understand that he will not be challenging President Trump on his attacks on President Zelensky when they meet. I do wonder, Alex, if this is something we'll need to distinguish, that that's probably in private, and actually he may almost be kind of forced into it in a sort of press conference situation in any case. But is this the right approach? Does Trump need any more of a rebuke from somebody like Sir Keir Starmer when it comes to his comments on President Zelensky?
Well, look at the response to President Zelensky. That's the big question.
Yeah.
Do you want to risk the ire of Donald Trump in the way that President Zelensky did? He was basically the first person since Trump's inauguration to stand up and say, no, I don't think so. This deal does not work for us, and therefore we do not agree with your description. And look at the diplomatic upheaval that has happened as a result of that, since Donald Trump accused him of being a middling or mildly successful comedian, an unelected dictator, threatening to pull Starlink, as in, i.e. pulling the internet access for a lot of Ukrainian troops as part of these negotiations. There will have been a real wake-up call in Europe as a result of that. So will Keir Starmer have his Love Actually moment against the US president over the next couple of days? Seems unlikely, because it seems unproductive, perhaps. That will be the calculation in Downing Street, that whether or not, if you kind of publicly go hammer and tongs with Donald Trump, all he will do is bite back harder, is bite back harder. And whether or not that's particularly helpful for Ukraine, the decision in Downing Street behind the scenes seems to have been, no, let's try and be emollient, let's try and bring him back on side to have a better deal for Ukraine.
Yeah. Alex, thank you very much. Good to hear from you this morning. Alex Kadier there, reporting live from Kyiv.
Now, the Polish president has told the Ukrainian president to remain calm and constructive in his negotiations with Donald Trump, who he is due to meet in Washington, D.C. later. Sorry, I was going to read that.
No, that's okay. Shall I? It's up to you. President Duda told followers on X he had held a candid conversation with his Ukrainian counterpart during a phone call yesterday. Although the views of Poland's president are often at odds with the sentiments of other key decision makers in the country, does Duda's comments show a softening of resolve towards Ukraine?
Well, joining us now to discuss this is the Polish MP and leader of the Poland-America Parliamentary Alliance, Aleksandra Uznańska-Wiśniewska. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Chloe. Good morning, Callum. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for having taking the time to talk with us this morning. So first of all, yesterday there was a tweet put out by the Polish president. She said directly talking to President Zelensky. He'd had a conversation with President Zelensky, and he said, "I conveyed to him that we consistently believe there is no other way to stop the bloodshed and achieve lasting peace in Ukraine except with the support of the United States." He went on to say, "I suggested to President Zelensky to remain committed to the course of calm and constructive cooperation with Donald Trump." Do you agree with that? Is that the strategy that should be adopted here?
So, I believe that given the fact that Poland really understands the threat of Russian imperialism, and we also believe that we're in a quite unique position when it comes to cooperation with the United States, we enjoy a very strong bilateral cooperation with the US on the level of the both economically and on the level of the defense spending as well, with a lot of Polish investments done in the American military industry and a presence of over 10,000 American troops in Poland. So I believe that the intentions of our president have been very much supportive of President Zelensky, even though I would myself have phrased it entirely differently. I believe that we have an obligation to speak truth to power, even in difficult situations. And I have no doubt, and I've been saying it myself multiple times over the past few days in multiple interviews, that we have an obligation as well to ensure, that there is no disinformation being spread, and that it is clear to our allies that the position of Poland is such that we recognize the fact that Ukraine is currently a victim of unprovoked Russian aggression, that it has been a victim of such since 2014, and that currently President Zelensky, who is fighting very much as well for the values of NATO and the values of the EU, deserves full support, for political support from NATO in its continued fight against Russia.
We know, of course, that Poland has invested heavily in defence. Poland leads NATO defence spending at 4.7% of GDP. Do you agree with Donald Trump's assessment that the rest of Europe really hasn't been spending enough on defence?
Well, Poland has been saying it for quite a while. And myself, I've been on the security conference in Munich last week, where I spoke with my German and my French counterparts, amongst many other nations as well. And we've been discussing the military spending and the fact that, Poland indeed is a leader amongst NATO states. We spend 4.7%, and we'd like other states to do so. And we've been disquieted to see that only, approximately sort of 23 out of the 32 allies are meeting the 2% threshold. So we'd like everybody to take the defense spending extremely seriously. And it is very clear to us that given the current threats and the rising Russian imperialism, we all have to take the situation extremely seriously. Poland is currently undergoing the biggest military expansion since the Second World War, and a particularly big program when it comes to securing our eastern border with Belarus and with Russia, so-called the East Shield. So Poland is currently on the way to becoming really the strongest NATO shield, and a very responsible leader of the NATO's eastern flank. We don't really have a choice, given our geographical position. And we'd very much we've been trying to persuade our other NATO allies, specifically the UK, for instance, and France, with its unique capabilities as well, sort of tactical nuclear missile capabilities, to take the situation extremely seriously and to ramp up its defense spending and to try to sort of translate it also into the local investments into jobs, R&D, science, academia.
Yeah. Are you concerned that the US under Donald Trump is stepping back from providing security for Europe? Do you think, well, first of all, should it solely be Europe's responsibility to provide security for Europe, clearly including Ukraine? And do you think Europe is capable of doing that?
So I believe that at present we find ourselves in a fragile and difficult situation since too long. For too long, a lot of European states have been relying on cheap security and have been downplaying the danger that is posed by Kremlin's regime. This is something that, Poland has been sort of strongly advocating for taking the situation extremely seriously. And we believe, that we must work tirelessly and ceaselessly daily into ensuring the alignment between the US and Europe, and to ensuring that there is a transatlantic unity between us, while we continue strengthening the European pillar of NATO. Poland is currently leading the EU presidency under the motto "Security Europe." So we actually are a very strong advocate for ensuring that we are fully prepared as Europe to respond and to continue supporting Ukraine for however long Ukraine and the Ukrainians will be willing to fight.
Yeah.
And we believe that Ukraine must receive very strong security guarantees. We do believe that the path for the future of Ukraine is in fact in NATO, in the EU, and we support these aspirations, to align themselves with NATO and the EU very much.
Okay.
And we'd like to ensure that also the frozen Russian assets are used to finance the continued aid support to Ukraine.
Thank you for joining us this morning. That is Aleksandra Uznańska-Wiśniewska, who is a Polish MP. She's leader of the Poland-America Parliamentary Alliance. Really interesting. They're talking about the need to speak truth to power and the importance in this meeting between the Polish president and Donald Trump today to really give some home truths, but also says that Europe has been relying on cheap security for too long and downplaying the threat from the Kremlin regime.